In discussions how to defeat the knight without armor on yourself, there are many people who claim to have an optimal plan to defeat the knight without the need of armor. There is an old German saying that goes, "No plan survives the first contact with the enemy." Don't understand me wrong, it is important to have plans when you go to a fight. But keep in mind that your opponent also have plans. And when he can rely on his armor, he has a huge advantage over you. Hi, I am Dequitem, an armored fighter in non-choreographed night fights like those. Before we talk about how to defeat a knight and what is the perfect weapon to injure someone in fully armor, we have to make clear how strong and powerful armor really is. I made some weapon and armor tests in the past, and all these tests show how powerful armor really is. It's nearly impossible to penetrate armor, even with the heaviest maces or with the sharpest poleaxes. All these can't really destroy hardened plate armor. Even longbows and crossbows made it really hard to penetrate armor really deep. So of course you can penetrate a few centimeters, but you will not penetrate armor deep enough. Most people know that if you get struck with a sword, that armor will protect you and the cutting ability goes to zero. But many people believe that the force of a blow will be transferred to the body through the plates. But this is not correct. Imagine this mace will hit my head. So the force of this spike will be transferred directly to a very small point of my skull and will break the skull. But what if I have a helmet or the strikes hit my shoulder plate? So normally the force of these strikes will not dent the armor significantly. So the force will transfer to a large part of the full plate. So if I get a hit here, the force will be transferred to this plate and overall to the next plates because they are overlapping each other. So this strike will hit not a single point of my bone, it will hit my full shoulder and parts of my arm. This large surface makes it possible to tank these hits without significant damage. Sometimes it doesn't even hurt. So even the most powerful strikes will normally don't break my bones under the armor, and sometimes even do any bruises. There's another misconception that only the padding of armor protects you from the impact of strikes. But that's not true. Because if a plate armor is formed correctly and fits perfectly to your body, normally you don't need padding at all. So most late medieval German Gothic armor is shaped so perfectly fitting around your body that all the force will transfer to a huge part of the body and padding isn't needed anymore. So most arming doublets of the late medieval time aren't padded anymore. There are only 4 layers of linen that will protect you from scratches and other bruises that came from wearing armor. But what about the helmet? The helmet of a medieval knight sits normally very close to the head and hasn't much padding. So if a strike hits the helmet and dents the metal, it can be dangerous. And of course, the impact can make concussions and knock someone out. Not all concussions will be a problem in a fight. They often become a problem after the fight. So if you try to strike the opponent's head, you normally try to knock him out, not deal any concussions that will kill him hours or days or weeks after the fight. So if armor is so powerful, how to kill someone, and is it possible for a knight in fully armor to rush at someone who is attack you without armor? Can you tank all these strikes and go fully in? If you try to kill a knight, you normally go for the weak spots of armor. So the so-called gaps of armor and lower armored parts, like mail parts. The most obvious gaps of armor are normally the armpits and inside of the arms and legs. But these parts are often armored with mail armor. And it isn't that easy to kill a knight through the mail and penetrate the mail armor. Even here, this dagger is really sharp and of course is able to kill, but I can push it here into my gaps and don't penetrate me. I have to push with 2 hands and a very strong grip, or with the power of a really powerful strike. So, what are the real gaps of armor? Sometimes there are no real gaps and you have to attack these weaker points of armor. But in some armors, like my armor, there are small gaps between these plates where you can step a knight between and directly hit my gambeson. These gaps and weaker points of my armor are unfortunately spread over my full body. So there is a gap between my legs. There are gaps inside my elbows, inside my armpits, between the plates of my shoulder, and sometimes even in the visor slits and other parts. So it is really hard for a knight to see if your opponent trying to reach for these gaps or if he will hit your armored parts and you can tank it. So most of the attacks of an opponent have to be blocked because you're not sure if it will hit your armor. Armor should be the last stand against an attack, not the first choice to take a hit. Many people compare a fight between an unarmored man and a fully armored knight with a fight between a dexterity build and a tank. But that doesn't fit really well because armor don't make you much slower. There is no significant difference between striking with a mace without armor or in armor. It's nearly the same, and I'm absolutely capable in striking really, really fast. Same goes for other weapons. When I'm wielding a two-handed axe, I'm absolutely the same speed as a normal unarmored man. And these belongs to all different kinds of attacks. Of course, there is a small difference between weapons and the use of weapons in and without armor. So, if you fight a normal longsword fight, I can't move my arms in the fully extent. But these small differences don't make a huge impact. But wearing armor and be protected in nearly every part make a huge difference. And most techniques are absolutely possible in fully armor. There are, of course, problems in grappling where your arms are more easily get locked. But there are some significant advantages of armor, because it's not possible anymore to break your arms or turn them in different angles, because the armor will help your arm to stay in structure. In wrestling and grappling, armor can of course be a hindrance and make you sometimes stuck. But remember, it's such a huge advantage when you get stabbed or try to stab someone if you don't have to force on your own defense. Even thrusts with a dagger are normally in the same speed like without armor. Of course, armor tires you out faster than wearing no armor. So, if you fight a duel, it's not important if you get tired out in around 5 minutes. It's important that you survive the first 5 to 30 seconds. So, what about if you can't decide? If you have to fight alone against a fully armored knight without armor on yourself. So, what is the perfect weapon to defeat a knight? Many people believe that the best weapon to kill a knight is the dagger. And of course, many of my videos end with the use of a dagger. Maybe most of my videos end with the use of a dagger. But in most of these videos, I already injured or simulate an injury on my opponent. And it came to the situation that a fighter attacks someone who is already injured in close combat to kill him. But what if you choose the dagger as your main weapon and charge in with the dagger? The first problem, of course, is that a dagger hasn't much reach and you have to go close first. Of course, there are techniques like holding the dagger by the blade and use it to protect yourself and go in with the dagger as your guard. But most other weapons are a better option for defending yourself, because a dagger can't really defend you against any other type of weapon. And even against a dagger, you normally can only defend you with your second free hand. and this hand is very vulnerable. So what about if you manage this to come close, take his arm and try to stab your opponent? Yes, if you manage all the parts before, you have a chance. But keep in mind, your opponent, the knight, will always have a dagger himself. And he is able to stab you, and every thrust into your body will be very, very dangerous. When I hit myself with the dagger, there is no penetration in my breastplate, and even if I manage to strike to the gaps of my armor and hit the male part, it's not clear if this shot will penetrate it. And even then, it's not sure if this tiny blade will kill me. Because you sometimes need more than one step to an opponent to make him fall, and don't let him stand up again. If you stab a knight, you often need two hands to push the dagger blade inside the male armor and into the body. You can't thrust to your opponent with a single step and hope that the dagger blades goes magically through all his armor. Getting a lucky step to the visor and other parts of armor is much harder in close combat. It's much easier if you have a weapon that can penetrate armor much easier and has more power, and a longer distance where you can keep yourself safe. A thrust to the helmet that doesn't slip over the helmet is capable to knock you out. And if you managed it to hit the male part, it will more likely penetrate the male and can thrust into your body. But most knights also used spears or other long pole weapons. So if you fight a knight in full armor, he will also use a spear and will strike to you and thrust to you in longer distances. And armor doesn't make it much harder to thrust to someone and use the full reach of a spear. So you're not in a huge advantage. Of course, you're normally able to move a little bit faster and turn your body. But with a spear, you're normally that fast that it isn't really possible to keep your head safe or your full body. And if you have not only these small gaps in your armor and your full body can be a target, then a spear is much more deadly than other weapons. What about on even longer distances, like using a crossbow? Many tests about crossbows, and I will do some tests too, show that armor isn't that easy to penetrate. Of course, you are capable to penetrate my mail armor, but not really my plates. Even this crossbow with a fast loader don't make it easy to shoot more than one bolt at your opponent before he can reach you. So you only have one chance of making your opponent fall with this weapon. And most of the bolts will be deflected by my armor. Even with the perfect shot, a bolt is only capable to penetrate a few centimeters and will not kill you. Only if you hit the gaps of my armor, the chainmail parts, you can do damage and injure me pretty bad. But it's really hard to aim for these small gaps, the armpits, the inner arms, the inner legs. And maybe my visor if you hit the sides. What about using these two-handed war axes and pole hammers? These weapons are kind of designed to fight against armor. The spikes are thickened and really pointy, and the axes are normally blunt and pointy. And of course there are hammers on the back side to fight a fully armored knight. But what about if you don't have armor? Are these weapons really a good choice? Of course, they are designed to have many options. To hook your opponent with the axe blade, to strike your opponent with the warhammer, or to thrust in the gaps of armor with the spike as the main weapon. And the spike, of course, yes, it's possible to penetrate with these special thickened spikes with a pointy end into the mail and injure you there. But you will not penetrate my plate armor. With these weapons, it is much harder to defend yourself. And you are at a distance for optimal striking power of your opponent. And if you want to pin the weapon of your opponent, you normally need a closer distance, or if you want to stay out of reach, you need a longer weapon. These weapons are designed for fighting in armor. Same applies to longswords. Longswords are optimal for striking unarmored and thrusting against armored targets. Some of these longswords, called S-torques, are reinforced at the tip and are for use with two hands, one hand on the blade for half swording to thrust in the gaps of armor. Of course, these swords, S-torques, are designed for fighting against armor. But these swords are also designed for a fighter in armor. Because you normally can't defend yourself pretty well if you're using two hands on the blade and don't have a shield at your side, or the option to grab the enemy weapon and thrust in the gaps. Of course, it is possible to hit your opponent in the gaps of the armor with the pointy end at a longer distance. Of course, you can train this, but even here it is much easier for the knight to hit your body with his sword than you could. So what about the one-handed options, like a mace? Of course, it is possible to take a shield if you're using a one-handed weapon. But even here, it's not that easy. Of course, a shield is something like a movable armor and is very powerful at longer distances. So if you use a spear and a shield, you can defend yourself pretty well. Same applies if you have a sword and a shield or mace and a shield. So as long as your opponent stays at a range where you can hit him and protect yourself with a shield, you're in a good position and it can work. But what if your opponent manages to grab you, throw you, or fight with you in a closer distance? There, these maces have the option for powerful strikes because they are normally very short, but if it's too close, these weapons became kind of useless. And also, these weapons will not injure your opponent if you didn't manage to hit the armored fighter at the head. Because of course you can knock out someone. You can make him bruises if you hit his armored parts or the lower armored parts. But it is not possible to break bones through armor with these maces. If you only have a mace and no shield at your side, a mace is a really bad choice because it's too short to block much, to protect yourself. And to protect yourself with a mace, you have to go into grappling. And to fight in grappling with a knight that normally have a dagger at his side, it's not a good option to try to grab him and use powerful strikes. Remember, you can only strike to the head if you want to knock out someone or break something significantly. And in such a position, it's really hard to hit the head of your opponent, and striking to the knees or other limbs doesn't make much sense in armor. So with the mace you normally have a reach disadvantage, and when you want to fight close you normally have to tank strikes of your opponent. So a mace in use without armor and not on a horseback, your chances are really bad. You need a shield to make this work. So what is the best weapon to kill a knight? It's maybe not a single weapon. You need a variety of weapons to kill a knight. If you have to hit the gaps of armor to injure him significantly, the best option for a ranged weapon is of course the crossbow, because this weapon will hit without much training really good and accurate. When you use the crossbow at a longer distance, you may have 2 shots, maybe only 1, and then you have to drop the crossbow. My next weapon of choice will be the spear. The spear makes it possible for you to hit your opponent at a longer distance, maybe once, maybe twice. And maybe you will have a lucky shot to his visor set or to his male parts in the armpits. If you fight a knight without a pole weapon, he will definitely go close. So if your knight only have a short pole hammer, a war axe, a sword or something like this, he will kick your spear to the side and go fully in. Maybe you have a lucky shot, maybe not. Then you need a third weapon. Many knights use the spear in combination with the longsword. So if they didn't hit the opponent with the spear, they were able to drop this spear and go fully in with a half sword. This option is also possible without armor. But the problem is that most of these thrusts are attacks where you rely on your own armor. So you drop the spear and directly attack with the longsword without defending yourself. You only keep your arms tight to protect your armpits and turn your hip if something tries to stab you in the legs. But this isn't a big option if you are not using armor. So this is maybe not the best option. Maybe it's much better if you try to thrust with the spear and misses, to let off the spear, maybe block the opponent's strike with the spear and go close with the dagger and try to grab the arms of your opponent. And even this is maybe not the best option, because your opponent, the knight, will do the same. And you will lose this game if you're not on the ground. So it's maybe not the best option to grab the dagger, but to grab without weapons for the knight, to go in wrestling and throw him on the ground. Because only there you have the possibility to pin the arms and weapons of the knight to the ground. When you have him on the ground, you need your third or fourth weapon, the dagger. Because you're not capable to kill him with breaking limbs or breaking his neck without a weapon. And you have to be aware of the knight, because his punches with a heavy gauntlet will hit you hard. And you have to be afraid of his dagger, of course, as well. Of course, fighting an armored knight without armor on yourself isn't fair. History was never fair, but you shouldn't fight fair as well. There are a couple of techniques how to fight an unfair fight. So something like pocket sand can be a small advantage. You shouldn't fight a knight alone. You should swarm him with other companions and different weapons at the same time. The use of special weapons like these man catchers can be in your favor and be used to win a fight against a knight. Many peasants fought knights in different wars and revolts, but normally these peasants were armored as well. If you watch historical sources of peasant revolts, nearly every peasant in historical paintings wear a chest plate and a helmet. Of course, these helmets are not the same quality like knight helmets. Sometimes these were only scales on leather, and sometimes they don't have arm protection. But gauntlets, a chest plate and a helmet is nearly on every soldier or peasant. That doesn't mean that fighting a knight without armor isn't historical. There are of course cases like ambushes where someone have to fight against an armored man without armor on himself. And in these scenarios it didn't happen often that the unarmored man had to succeed. So in general, the chances of winning against a fully armored knight without armor on yourself are really, really low. And there are no optimal plans to defeat a knight if you don't use an ambush and traps. It is not a good choice to try to defeat him in a fair fight, because it will not be a fair fight. There isn't any anti-armor weapon that helps you to defeat a knight. There is no optimal technique or strategy to defeat a fully armored knight. You need overall luck. Then, thanks for watching. Keep yourself safe and don't fight a knight in fully armor. Bye bye.